Good morning. Welcome to our webinar on improving the quality of the REACH registration dossier. We will talk about what the authorities are planning and how you can prepare. My name is Christelle Musset. I'm the Director of Hazard Assessment in ECHA. I will go through the agenda first. So I will start with an introduction on where do we stand after 10 years of REACH evaluation. Then we will talk about the joint action plan. Laurence Hofstadt will go through the action plan and will present in detail what we want to achieve with this action plan. Then Mariana Fernandez de Barros will explain the CEFIC action plan and the commitment by the CEFIC companies, and I will have concluding remarks. And the webinar will remain open for questions after the presentations. You can send your questions about the presentations at any time. And if you have any technical difficulties, you can also send messages through the Q&A panel. So as I said, send questions at any time. We will only reply to questions that are related to the scope of the webinar. And if your question is not answered by the end of the webinar, please contact the help desk, and you have the address of the contact form. So I guess you know who we are, but just to remember a little bit, we are an independent European institution agency based in Helsinki since 2007. We've been set up for the implementation of the REACH legislation. We are right now 650 staff members from 28 countries. And of course, our mandate is to implement EU chemicals legislation. And as you will see in my next slide, we have been set up for REACH, but over time, we've been tasked with other legislation. Our main competences, you have them on the screen, but clearly we have competences in data management. We can say, now the biggest regulatory database in the world. And just because of this fact, we have built a lot of competencies in data management for receiving this information, for processing this information, and also for publishing the information. We have, of course, built a lot of competencies on the assessment of chemicals. We've looked at more than 1,000 chemical substances in detail. We are doing risk management through restriction, through authorization. And of course, we are also doing impact analysis of chemicals. We have to, for our risk management measures, to assess the impact of the measure. And that's something new which has been built with REACH. So as I said, over time, we've been tasked with other legislation. So we have REACH. We have also, since 2008 or 10, I don't even remember, we have the CLP legislation, the classification, labeling, packaging for all chemicals and mixtures which are on the EU market. We are implementing, coordinating the implementation of the biocidal product regulation. We have the PIC regulation, which is the implementation in Europe of the Rotterdam Convention, and it's regulating the import and export of hazardous chemical. And since recently, we are also supporting the Commission and the Member States in the implementation of the Stockholm Convention, which is the POP regulation. But you will see that we have also new work areas, in particular, the development of a portal for the notification of hazardous mixtures. And that will be one portal for all for the companies to submit all their notifications for all the member states. We have built an EU Nano Observatory where we collect information on the nanochemicals. We are developing right now something which will be great help for the chemical companies. It's the EU Chemical Legislation Finder, where there will be one portal for finding how a chemical is regulated at EU level. So not only the legislation covered by ECHA, but other chemicals legislation. Since recently, we are working on the occupational exposure limits, and that is a great way forward to bring synergies between the REACH and the OSH legislation. And finally, we are developing, in the context of the Waste Framework Directive, what we call the SKIP database, but it's basically a database where companies will have to report on the hazardous chemicals that are in their articles. So you see that over time, our scope of responsibilities have increased. But coming back for REACH, and why are we so putting emphasis on the reliability of the data that you submit in your dossier and the compliance of the REACH registration dossier? I mean, REACH and the registration is not an administrative exercise. We are not doing that for administration. The thing is, by collecting hazard information and use information, we are building knowledge on how the properties of chemicals and how they are used in Europe. And from there, it's the necessary knowledge for the companies and for the authorities to do proper safety assessment, to propose risk management measures that are necessary to handle the chemicals safely. And this information, let's not forget that it goes in the supply chain through the safety data sheets, the extended safety data sheet. So basically, what REACH is about is providing safe use, and it is up to the companies via their registration dossier to ensure that they have the necessary information to do a proper safety assessment and to do a proper recommendation of safety measures for the supply chain. It also ensures a level playing field because all companies have to do the same things. And we are building knowledge. So that's what REACH is about. It's not an administrative exercise. It's not getting a registration number. It is important, of course, to get the registration number. But the bottom line is to make sure that we have the necessary information to ensure to the European citizens that the substances are being produced and used safely. So I will come back on the reliable data, but de facto, having reliable data, compliant data, is the required condition to ensure the safe use. So where do we stand after 10 years? Something that we have all to recognize. Despite what I'm going to say in the next slide, there have been tremendous efforts by the chemical companies to collect information on their chemicals, to do the assessment. And that is something that we should really be very proud of at European level, and we should not forget that. We have the biggest database in the world on properties and uses of chemical, and this information is available on our website. And if you look at who are the person using this database, where are they from, you will see that the first users is definitely Europe on the published database, but number 2 is the United States, and number 3 is Asia. So it means that this database with this information is being used throughout the world. So we should be very proud of that at European level. And of course, as I was explaining already, for the companies, it's definitely the better knowledge of the chemicals. Having done through the registration process, it means that every company has to look at the portfolio of their chemicals and have now, each company has now a better knowledge on their chemicals. For the authorities, this information is our basis for decision making, and our risk management measures are being done based on the information that you have submitted, not only on the properties, but also on the users, because we do prioritize the chemicals to look at more in detail thanks to the users' information. And of course, for the citizens, is the information, they have the right to be informed on the risk that certain chemicals can pose to them. And it's also a way to increase the trust of the citizens and makes them comfortable and sure that the chemical industry is doing a right job. And what I was saying also, REACH we're building knowledge. And REACH can be considered as a knowledge-based legislation for other legislation. Through this information that we collect through REACH, we can use it in other contexts. And it could be the Waste Framework Directive, it could be the End-of-Life Vehicle Directive, whatever the legislation in Europe. But for industry, it's important that if we have good data on the REACH, we can use it elsewhere, and it really increases the consistency across EU legislation, and it increases the synergies. And a good example is definitely between REACH and the OSH legislation. Information collected on the REACH, reported in the chemical safety report, can be used at the workplace for the OSH legislation. And of course, we ensure a better protection of the citizens. And once again, having reliable data is also important with what we want to do now with Europe, which is increasing the circularity of chemicals. And if you think about what is a material, it's a mixture of chemicals. And if we want to make sure that we re-inject in the loop only the chemical that we should re-inject and not the hazardous one, we need to have reliable data on each chemical. So I guess that my presentation so far was to convince you that it's important to have up-to-date, reliable information, and we are not doing this exercise for administration, but for bringing something beneficial at EU level. So a lot of progress over the last 10 years, and again, we should be proud of what has been achieved in Europe, but still, despite all the efforts, there are still major incompliances in the registration dossier, and we need to tackle that. And it was definitely an outcome of the European Commission's second review of REACH, which was finalized in 2017, where one of the outcomes was the need to significantly improve the evaluation procedures. So if we look at why the dossier have non-compliances. What is it? If you look at how the dossier have been built, especially for the high tonnage substances, there is a lot of what we call waiving of data requirements. So instead of providing the standard information requirements which are required in the REACH annexes, depending on the tonnage, many registrants have waived the data requirements and have produced adaptation, provided adaptation. And these adaptations are read across, weight of evidence, QSAR. And what we are observing, first in all the dossiers that we have looked at in detail, 86% of these dossiers present adaptations. And it's not that you cannot submit adaptation, because of course it's foreseen in the REACH legislation. You can totally submit adaptation, but you need to be able to justify properly why you believe that your adaptation is suitable. And for doing that, you need a number of underlying data to justify. For example, if you build a category, you need to show that you have a trend in these categories. And basically, it means that you need to have sufficient underlying data to show us the trend. If you do a read across because of structural similarity, you have to explain the structural similarity, but you need also to explain why you believe that same effect will be from one substance to another very similar substance. So what we are observing is the documentation is insufficient, there is not enough justification or no sufficient data to support the adaptation. And it is correct that so far we have rejected a lot of adaptation where we are conducting the compliance check. So, as I've tried to explain already, addressing REACH compliance, it's really important. It's through having good information in the dossier that first, we can make sure that you, registrant, you can provide adequate recommendation in the supply chain to your clients. But also for us, it enables us to do good risk management decision at EU level. So I can say that now, since we have worked on a joint action plan with the Commission, and I can say since the second REACH review, compliance check has become a top priority at ECHA level. And you will have more information on the joint action plan, but it has, of course, to be able to increase our speed, to increase our impact through compliance check. We have looked at a number of concrete actions to be able to do it on ECHA and authority sides. But if you look at the action plan and if in detail, you see that it impacts all actors of REACH. It impacts ECHA for providing more compliance check. It impacts the Commission, who have to provide a number also of actions to support the speeding up the compliance check process. It impacts the companies, of course, and it impacts the competent authorities in the member states. But you will have more detail about that. So with that, I would like to conclude the introduction, and I pass the floor to my colleagues. Thank you very much for your attention.
Hello everyone, my name is Laurence Hofstadt, and I'm going to now present you more details on this joint action plan to tackle REACH compliance. So really the main objectives are set already in the action plan by 2023 for the substances in tonnages over than 100 tons, and by 2027 for all other substances from 1 to 100 ton tonnage bands per year. ECHA will have on one hand screened all registration dossiers submitted by the 2018 deadline, and will have performed compliance check for all substances where it's needed, meaning that when data gaps prevent from concluding whether there is a concern or whether a substance is of low priority for further regulatory action. So this is really a brief description on how we prioritize. Basically, we are going to take care of this gray zone where we don't know yet whether the substance will be of low priority, depending on its hazard or exposure, or where it will be, if it's on a high priority, obviously we are going towards the regulated substances, and then we also have a clear answer and a clearer way forward. So this action plan can be really summarized in this small table. So it's 15 actions split into 5 areas. The first one is to address all substances, and this is clearly described in the objectives. And it's about targets and timelines. The second area, it's about improving the clarity of the legal provisions. And it's about the REACH annexes and decision-making. This third area is about accelerating compliance check decision-making by simplifying decisions, the standard text that we use in our decisions, having clear alignments among authorities, and also to better integrate the various processes under evaluation. The fourth area is about enforcement matters, so how to improve the follow-up and enforcement of ECHA evaluation decisions while keeping the dossiers compliant. And the fifth area is on industry to take on this compliance challenge and setting up proper working arrangements. About the area 4 and 5, I will not go into any details, and area 5 will be taken by Mariana. So first, the first area to address all substances. This is the responsibility on the Commission and on ECHA. The first one was to propose an amendment of the REACH Article 41.5 to raise the compliance check target from 5 to 20% of dossiers selected per year. The second one, and this is really detailing the main objectives, by 2020, ECHA will have concluded whether the substance above 100 tons are of priority for regulatory risk management, are of low priority, or where we can't decide the priority and we will need more data for a judgment to be made. And we commit to publish these conclusions and communicate to the various stakeholders. By the end of 2021, we'll develop a similar approach for the lower tonnages substances. So same thing about the 3 area. And then by the end of 23 and 27 for the relevant tonnages, as described in the objectives, we will conclude whether the substances are a priority for regulatory risk management, whether substances are of low priority, and where ECHA will have requested information under compliance check. And this should be ongoing and awaiting the data where needed. Okay, so what we have achieved so far related to the first action, the new compliance check targets have been amended in an implementing regulation, and it's now at 20% of dossiers a year. This is completely in line with our integrated regulatory strategy, where we, in any case, focus on substances that matter most. This will cover roughly 16,000 substances in over 60,000 dossiers, which have been registered in full until the end of 2018. And the way we proceed is that we IT screening, we group substances, and those substances are assessed and then put in these regulatory pools that I just mentioned. And I have to say, the grouping is not in relation with the grouping that you as registrant may have done, but it's really based on specific features or similar features. And also what I wanted to add is that these timelines are preliminary because we acknowledge that the market is dynamic, that new substances may be registered, or the tonnages may be upgraded or downgraded, and there may be also cease of manufacture and import of some substances. So this is what we mean by the regulatory pool. Either they are high priority for regulatory risk management, and we know already that they are in a process of being regulated, or they will enter that process. We will decide whether substances are low priority because they are already regulated, or because they don't show criteria for priority in terms of toxicity or risk. And we will have a pool for priority for data generation. And as I was mentioning, we are at this stage not able to conclude on the risk or on the need for risk management. So these substances will be candidate for compliance check and or substance evaluation. Sorry. The next set of actions is about improving the clarity of the legal text. And this is basically the Commission reviewing, based on ECHA's experience and proposals, the need to amend annexes to clarify standard information requirements. So the annexes 6 to 10, apologies. And really it's about clarifying the information requirements and not adding new ones. Then they will also assess the need to amend the Annex 11 for better justification of adaptations, and also assess the need for possible implementing regulation to efficiently put into effect the evaluation decision-making process. And so at this stage, we have made proposals to the European Commission in July. They have been discussed further, and they have been put in two levels of priorities. The European Commission is focusing on priority 1, which can be processed quickly. The next set of actions is about accelerating the decision-making. And the first action is on ECHA to simplify compliance check decisions and improve the statement of reasons to be clearer and more focused. This year we have actually started already at the beginning of the year, so you may have received already the draft decisions, and you will have noticed indeed those differences in structure. I'll come back to that in a minute. Then ECHA is also tasked to organize workshops with member states in order to resolve underlying differences if they still exist. And this result is committed to be presented to the member state committee. And we will continue as far as possible to identify further need for discussion on more generic issues if needed. And also by the end of the year, we will have made a refined proposal to Caracal, which is the Member State Committee discussion forum, on how to better integrate substance evaluation and compliance checks. And so actually, since we are at the end of the year, we can confirm that the Member State Committee chair has met with many members individually to attempt to resolve these divergences. These are going to be further discussed early next year. And ECHA has made proposals to the Member State competent authorities early in November. So this has been well received and will be discussed and implemented further next year. So when I come to dossier evaluation decisions, I'll explain a bit more why those changes were felt as being really needed. First of all, as per the legal text, the formal existence of CEIFs have ended in June 2018. So the way we issue our decisions was meant to really support further collaboration and data and cost sharing within the joint submission. Of course, it's also as the aim to improve compliance to the standard information requirement and improve the quality of the data which is submitted in order to ensure safe use further down the chain. And the way we have set our decision is to really ensure greater certainty and clarity on the regulatory obligations of every member of a joint submission and to help ensure everyone can comply. And at the same time, we also look at the registrant who may have used opt-outs as they can in the legal text. So that's we actually, when we do a compliance check, we check the compliance of all dossiers related to one substance to ensure better level playing field. Also, we have clarified a few steps further. So the latest registration dossier available is the basis for the draft decision. So this is why since last year we have encouraged registrants really to review their dossier, to check our dossier evaluation status page to see whether ECHA has started a compliance check on, or testing proposal evaluation on their dossier. And because we have clarified that the updates of those dossiers will be taken into account until the moment we send a draft decision. And then, of course, the legal basis of the decision cannot change during the decision-making process, unless, of course, there is a cease of manufacture or import of the substance. If there would be new information, we acknowledge it can be the case. That could also prevent from progressing with the request in the decision. They will need to be provided with the comments, and mainly there. Then this new way of drafting and of informing all members of a joint submission is really to ensure that there is no unnecessary animal testing and that the tests and information requested are there really to support the compliance across the whole joint submission. And finally, by sending the decisions to all members of the joint submission which are not compliant, it ensures that they get timely information to be able to make business decisions on their portfolio. So how we have proceeded, first what we continued doing in this year, as I was already explaining, we continue to have the same priorities and focus on the substances that we assess based on tonnage, uses, and data gaps, and also based on the endpoints which are critical for identifying substances of concern, CMR, PBT concerns. Then, as I was just mentioning, we have continued effort to induce timely dossier updates, and by timely it means also when new information becomes available or where the dossier is not. For example, at completeness checks, it's already identified that they will not meet some further criteria. And we have also had some sector collaborations. We are still committed to transparency, both on our dissemination, so information on the substance, but also on our processes. As I was mentioning, we have, since last year, dossier evaluation status page, where each time we start a dossier evaluation procedure, it's visible from that table. And of course, we continue ensuring safeguarding your procedural and legal rights. What we have changed, I've already hinted to a few things. We have extended the addresses of our decisions in order to bring the whole joint submission into compliance. So we address both the lead registrant, the opt-out registrants, the member registrants, and we send our decisions to all those registrants which are obliged to comply with respective testing or required information. The structure of our decisions has changed in order to be clearer. The requests are set per annex level, so each registrant knows to which annex they need to be compliant with. And I remind you that they are all additive annex. We have also focused our reasoning on ensuring the legal clarity of our reasoning. And we also make clearer when we state obligations versus recommendations. as I was also mentioning, since the dossier is the basis of our dossier evaluation steps, we expect that it's up to date, and which ensures that we ensure that there is visibility on the substance that are under assessment. And also, we have worked on ensuring that the dossier and the substance evaluation processes get more similar as far as possible. So what can you do now on your side? As we have often said, be proactive. I hope I was able to demonstrate that there will be an increasing number of compliance checks, so there is an increased chance that you will receive a compliance check decision. And especially because, according to some reports, the substances, 2/3 of the substances are non-compliant, and all of them will be addressed and checked. So the first thing to do is really to keep the dossier up to date. Not only it's a legal obligation, but it's also a proof from your side that you ensure safe use of the chemicals you are producing or importing. And there will actually be an implementing act to simulate dossier updates and to clarify the various obligations. And it's expected to be implemented or to be published next year. So when I'm talking about dossier updates, it's not just about uses, tonnages, or classification, but also if there are any new data generated, for example, under different processes of REACH or outside of EU, you have the obligation also to update your dossier with this new data. And of course, it will also reduce the risk that you receive a draft decision from ECHA. Then as a second step, by reviewing your dossier, you should also remove information that you find is no longer relevant, and instead potentially submit testing proposals, especially if you identify that now the read-across or category approaches that you may have used are not justified or cannot be further justified. And the advantage of testing proposals is that you can include within those testing proposals a testing strategy, and this will ensure, or this can ensure, that you will save animals or costs. And just still as a hint, if as part of your testing strategy, you may identify that you will need to generate, for example, lower tier studies, and these are not subject to testing proposal and can be initiated immediately. Also, you should really get organized if you need to generate further studies. So getting organized may also be a way of checking your contact details in REACH IT, but also be alerted and check your REACH IT inboxes more frequently, as you may have done in the past. And then if you receive a decision from ECHA, especially after the adopted decision, you'll need to make sure that you agree on which test material should be tested for those tests requested, and they should be representative of for all joint registrants. You should ensure that you do one test only. You have the obligation to identify one registrant which will perform the test requested, and that registrant has then a claim on to share the costs and the data with you later on. And of course, this new information generated should be submitted by the deadline imposed in the decision. And remember that trying to fulfill the requirements by making testing proposals instead of providing new tests or proposing new test strategies do not address any data gaps and do not remove the incompliances. So this is, as usual, we have quite many support documents on our website. I just wanted to point it that some of them have been updated last year in preparation of this new era, if I may say. So we have practical guides both on how to act in dossier evaluation, but also how to act in substance evaluation. We also have published practical guides on information requirements and adaptation, for example. We have also updated question and answers to be more responsive on to support, for example, member registrants who would start receiving now decisions. And we have also created a page of recommendations to registrants, and this was extracted from our experience for the past 10 years of dossier evaluation. As I was mentioning a few times, we also have a dossier evaluation status page to monitor your substances, and we have also other pages where you can see what are the authorities' priorities and plan. And when this page is published, those links will be active. You will be able to go directly there. So I think that's it. I thank you very much, and we are available for any questions you may have during this Q&A session. Thank you. Bye-bye. And I'll leave it now to Mariana.
So, good morning to all. I would like to thank ECHA for the opportunity to present to all of you the CEFIC action plan for the review and improvement of registration dossier. This presentation will have two parts. I will first try to give you a little bit the context on why do we need to work proactively in the review and improvement of the registration dossiers. And then the second part, I will actually present the CEFIC action plan itself. Starting with the context setting, first to make clear that we want REACH to work. We want people and the environment to be safe when handling and using chemicals, and that implies confidence in both the chemicals and also in the chemical legislation framework. How do we do that? We need to be able to demonstrate the safe use with data on both hazard and exposure. And in certain cases, of course, we need also to inform the uses that are not appropriate and identify the most appropriate risk management measures. We also should be very proud of what has been achieved so far in the last 10 years. We have now more than 22,000 substances that have been registered, and that means more than 95,000 registration dossiers. So a lot has been accomplished. And then we have REACH as the most ambitious and most extensible chemical legislation in the world. REACH has introduced novel and unique features. I'm talking, for instance, about the shifts, about the shifting of the burden of proof that is now on industry. We have now exposure scenarios, we have the authorization process. So a novel and unique features have been introduced with REACH. Furthermore, REACH also extensively covers both substance hazard and uses. And with all of this, it's a complex legislation, and it's subject to interpretation, both from a legal part and also from a scientific one. And there is no one-size-fits-all model. So in short, what this means is that we have sophisticated legislation, but with that it comes also complexity. To give you a little bit an example of what this complexity means, and if you consider one full registration dossier, that means that we are talking about more than 2,000 data fields in Euclid. In terms of studies and tests, we are talking about more than 70 studies on both physical and chemical properties, toxicological and ecotoxicological ones. It also means a lot of working hours, and here we are talking about above 100 hours of work. And within this registration dossier, there is also the need to manage the complexity of the dynamics of the consortium of the CIF. Of course, there is also the need to consider the time that some studies take, and some studies do take 1 to 2 years to run. And we still need to manage the complexity on the assessment on both the use and exposure. And this requires a lot of maintenance, because it requires that an update needs to be done when information is available. So in short, what we have is a sophisticated legislation and a complex one that we need to deal with. And in this last 10 years, REACH is and will be an ongoing learning process. As you can see in the slide, you have a little bit the time scale of these last 10 years and what has happened. We had the three registration deadlines for the phasing substances, and you see that a lot of ECHA guidance has been developed within these 10 years. Some guidance has been developed and made available in 2010, and some other guidance has been only made available in recent years, like the read-across assessment framework. And also, some of this guidance have also already been subject to updates. So a lot has happened in terms of ECHA guidance in these last 10 years. Furthermore, we also need to consider that the IT tools have also evolved over time. We have now Euclid with different versions that have evolved in the time. We have Quasar, we have the REACH IT, and all of them have evolved in this 10-year period. Furthermore, we also need to consider in terms of test guidelines that these ones also evolve in time. The scientific acknowledgement evolves with time, and of course this is reflected in the test guidelines. So we have learned a lot in 10 years. Guidance tool have evolved with time, and this is still an ongoing process that will continue. And then we go to the part of the balance between the need to generate new data and the fact that we need to use animal test as a last resort. And of course here, the read-across, the grouping and the weighting are essential, but of course they are also complex. And there is a need to have a common understanding of what this means. So in short, what we are talking about is matching industry expectations on what they present in their dossiers will fulfill the expectations of both ECHA and the national authorities of what they want to have in the dossiers. In terms of context, I also want to mention that something that was already mentioned in the previous presentations, that we do take the findings in both the second REACH review and in the ECHA annual reports on the evaluation very seriously. And this has led us to the action plan. So CEFIC has developed an action plan for the review and improvement of registration dossiers. This action plan has been launched on the 26th of June this year, and its main intention is for companies to proactively reassess their registration dossiers content and, if needed, address the data gaps in a prioritized manner. This commitment is open not only to all CEFIC member companies, but also to the members of the national associations. And then you ask, what are the main elements of this initiative? We have the action plan itself. As I mentioned, the action plan was launched on June this year, and it will run until 2026. In the action plan, there are also defined some KPIs for the implementation of the action plan itself. And here we are talking about the number of registration dossiers that have been re-evaluated with the distinction between those who have been re-evaluated by either individual submitters or by the lead registrant or by the co-registrant. And then we also define the roles and responsibilities for CEFIC and for companies, which are different. And it also sets some criteria for companies to prioritize their substance re-evaluation. As you can imagine, companies with big portfolios in terms of registration dossier need to be able to prioritize those who need to further work first because they cannot do everything at the same time. There's also an annual reporting, and a template has been developed so that companies know exactly what they need to report. How companies can join this initiative? They need to sign this declaration of intent where they commit to reevaluate their dossiers and to provide further information in the dossiers if there is the case for that. Companies also commit to report to CEFIC on an annual basis on their KPIs, and CEFIC will then prepare the annual reports for all this initiative. This action plan also has a cooperation framework with ECHA, and I will give you a little bit more of information on this. You have already heard about the Commission and ECHA REACH Evaluation Joint Action Plan, and specifically its Action 15. And this cooperation framework also replies a little bit to that action. So the intention of this framework and what the activities to be developed is for develop material to guide registrants towards a clear understanding of what is expected. So, as I mentioned before, the idea is to match the expectations so that companies, when they prepare their dossiers, can be reassured that the information that they put in their dossiers will be matching the expectations of what ECHA and the national authorities expect from their dossiers. And in terms of exactly what we want in terms of guidance, we do intend to develop in cooperation with ECHA case studies, examples of testing strategies and waiving justifications so that we can align as much as possible these expectations. I would also like to refer to you that we have already launched a pilot project with ECHA and with 3 voluntary companies. And the idea is that this pilot project will serve as a case studies to generate common learnings to be shared with the broader industry community. And here, testing strategies will be considered and how best we can balance the need to generate data with, at the same time, ensuring that animals tests are used as a last resource. Furthermore, we also expect to get some learnings about managing the consortium. We expect to have the learnings of this pilot project available in the second quarter of next year. Furthermore, in terms of the cooperation with ECHA, and this cooperation agreement is publicly available, there is also the agreement that ECHA will consider the possibility to inform, ideally 6 months in advance, companies of the substances they intend to go for compliance check. We also intend to have this process tracking to report what has been done and to disseminate these learnings that will result from this cooperation agreement with ECHA. In terms of transparency of the communication and the progress reporting, all the documents of this action plan, I mentioned to you the action plan itself, the cooperation agreement, the template to report, the declaration of intent, all of them are available on CEFIC website. We also intend to make available the guidance, the tools that will be produced during the implementation of this initiative, to do for the workshop summaries, which are also foreseen in the cooperation agreement with ECHA, and to refer to you that the first workshop, the kickoff workshop of this initiative, will be organized on the 29th of November in Brussels, together with ECHA, with their collaboration, and we will address the issues related to the managing of the consortium dynamics. And we also will bring to the discussion read-across examples and case studies will be discussed, and we hope to get some learnings that can be made available to a broader industry community on these topics. I have already mentioned to you the annual reports, so companies will report to us on an annual basis, and then CEFIC will anonymize those these reportings, and we'll make a progress report available in the website. We'll also give you any information that at the moment we have close to 150 companies that have joined this initiative, and the list of companies that joined this initiative is available on CEFIC website, so you can see all the companies that have already joined the initiative. So what we intend is to keep all the stakeholders informed about what has been happening with this implementation of this initiative. So what will be the role of CEFIC? CEFIC will act as a platform to support, to coordinate, to streamline companies' efforts to review and improve their dossiers. CEFIC will not run the consortium or will not work on the specific substance dossier, but will help to generate these common learnings that will be made available. And then, of course, to make this material available to all industry and government. We also intend as CEFIC to facilitate the interaction with ECHA, and this from both a technical and a scientific perspective, because challenges exist in both. We have been promoting this initiative and intend to engage as many companies as possible to join it. And for that, we have been working together with the national associations. We have been involved with several initiatives that have been promoted by the national associations, because, as I mentioned, this initiative is also open to members of the national associations. And we have been and will continue to be in dialogue with other registrant associations. So, what does this initiative entails for companies? First, of course, as I mentioned already, there is a need to prioritize which registration dossier they will work on first. So they will have to prioritize, they will have to set a prioritization process. And they will have to make both resources and should expect costs, because it is expected that more testing will be run. This means that the companies will have to put in place their own company implementation plans so that they know which registration dossiers they will work on, what resources, what costs they need to make available for this initiative to run. And of course, the majority of the registration dossiers are run within a joint submission. So we do expect further work within the consortium or the CIF. So CEFIC itself will not be involved in this individual dossier assessment. That's for each individual company to proactively review and improve their dossiers and to make this coordination within the consortium and CIF as applicable. So with this webinar, we also intend to invite all the CEFIC member companies, all the companies that are members of national associations, to commit to this CEFIC Action Plan initiative. And to do that, you need to sign the declaration of intent, committing to this proactively reevaluation of your registration dossier, and if needed, to review and improve them. You need to put in place your internal company dossier improvement plan, and then to report to CEFIC on an annual basis so that we can demonstrate progress in this initiative. So in short, what we're asking is that will help us to be proactive in this review and improvement of the dossiers. And with this, I would like to thank you for your attention, and I will be here to reply to your questions. So thank you.
So we come to the end of our webinar. I would like to thank the presenters for the presentation and you to have followed these presentations. And I will have some take-home message for you. So as I said in my introduction, a lot has been achieved in 10 years. We should be very proud what has been done in Europe, but we still have to acknowledge that we have many challenges ahead of us. REACH compliance is not only a legal obligation, but it shows that companies have taken their social responsibility seriously to use chemicals safely. And it's something very important to earn the confidence of the citizens. And for that, we need all of us, ECHA, the member state, the registrants, we need to fulfill our role. So all the material will be published, and you have the link on this slide. The webinar will remain open until 1:30 Helsinki time to answer your questions. And as I said at the very beginning, if your question is not answered by the end of this webinar, you can send it via our contact form. And again, you have the address on this slide. With that, I would like to thank you. I hope this webinar has been useful for you, and don't hesitate to contact us if you have any further information needed. Thank you very much.